He had lived in silence for over a decade, surrounded by the ghosts of those he'd lost. She arrived with nothing but a broken-down Jeep, 3 hungry children, and a single whispered plea that would shatter the walls he'd built around his heart. What happened next wasn't a rescue. It was a quiet kind of miracle, the kind that begins with kindness and ends with a family no one expected. If you believe that even the loneliest hearts deserve a second chance. If you've ever wanted proof that love can bloom where life once felt forgotten, then this story is for you. Don't forget to our channel to Soul Moment Story and tap the bell so you never miss a story that touches the soul and warms the heart. Now let us begin. The heat shimmered off the Wyoming highway like a mirage. Dust curled in lazy spirals as a rusted military Jeep rattled down the dirt road, the engine wheezing like an old man catching his breath. The sun, ruthless and unmoved, cast long, harsh shadows across a land that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Harlan Rhodes stood at the edge of his porch, hand resting on the curved handle of his hammer, eyes narrowed against the glare. He wasn't expecting visitors. He never was. Especially not now, not in July. Not after 10 years of keeping his distance from everything and everyone. The Jeep groaned to a stop just beyond his gate wheels, crunching against the gravel. A moment passed. Then the door creaked open. A woman stepped out. Her military fatigues were faded and torn at the seams, one shoulder stained with something darker than sweat. In her arms, she carried a toddler, limp, flushed, and barely conscious. 2 more girls trailed behind her, clutching hands and squinting into the sun. She was young, maybe 32. Strong posture, but exhaustion radiated from every part of her. She didn't speak at first. She just walked forward. Slowly, her boots kicking up dry soil, the heat dancing around her like a mirage. The girls followed steps, hesitant lips, chapped hair sticking to their faces. Harlan's voice cut through the stillness, low and hoarse. "You lost." The woman looked up, her eyes a washed-out green dulled by fatigue, but still sharp. She shook her head. "No, sir," she said softly. "Just desperate." She shifted the child in her arms, and the little one let out a weak, rasping cough. "I served. I got out 6 months ago, been moving ever since. Shelters are full, roads are long. This is the last place we saw with shade for miles." She hesitated. Then, with a humility that didn't ask for pity, she whispered, "Please, can we stay, even just for the shade?" Silence stretched between them. The heat pulsed around them like a living thing. Harlan looked past her at the 2 girls huddled together, one about 8, the other 6, sweat streaked down their temples like tears. Then at the toddler, whose lips were cracked and pale. He didn't answer. He simply turned, walked inside the house, and let the screen door slam shut behind him. The woman didn't move. The children didn't cry. A minute later, the door creaked open again. Harlan stepped back out, holding a battered metal pail filled with ice covered by a clean towel. "I've got water near the barn. Hose still works. There's space in the shed. Got fans, not air, but it'll keep you breathing." She blinked, lips parting as if to speak. "You can call me Harlan," he added gruffly, and set the pail down on the porch with a heavy thud. By dusk, the girls were sleeping on makeshift cots inside the shed, their cheeks no longer flushed, but still hollow with exhaustion. The woman Rowan Hale sat quietly on the wooden steps, hands cradling a cup of water like it was fine crystal. Harlan stood at the forge, not working, just staring at the cold anvil like it had betrayed him. The place hadn't seen fire in years, not since Clara and Emily. Rowan broke the silence. "They're good kids," she said. "Not loud. Not trouble." "I didn't say they were," Harlan replied, not turning around. A pause. Rowan looked down at her boots. "I'm not asking for charity. Just a few nights. I can help around the place. Fix things. You know, tools I used to build bomb defusal kits. I can fix a fence. That made him turn. He studied her, then not just the dirt and the heat that clung to her like armor, but the way she held herself. Like someone who'd been shot at and kept walking. Someone who didn't expect kindness but offered it anyway. You can stay in the shed, he said finally. Girls, too. Just don't touch the forge. Rowan nodded. He watched her for a beat longer. You got a name, Rowan? He grunted in acknowledgement. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Harlan. She smiled. It was small. Tired, but real. Then thank you, Harlan. That night the wind shifted. Just a little. And for the first time in years, Harlan didn't sit alone at his table. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But there were 2 cups on the porch railing, and the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was shared. By the time the sun rose over the dry ridge behind Harlan's property, the wind had picked up just enough to send little tornadoes of dust spiraling across the fields. The barn creaked, the metal roof expanding in the heat. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a hawk let out a sharp cry. Harlan was already outside, shirt stuck to his back, with sweat fixing a busted fence post on the north side. It wasn't broken, not really. But fixing things gave his hands something to do, and that kept his mind from wandering into places it didn't belong. From the shed, a soft knock, then a door creaking open. Rowan stepped out wearing a clean olive green t-shirt and jeans that looked like they'd been patched a dozen times. Her hair was tied back into a low, messy knot. Behind her trailed Junie and Maple, each carrying a small bucket. Wren still slept, curled up on the cot with a thin sheet and one of Harlan's old work shirts for a blanket. We boiled the water, like you said, Rowan called out. Figured we'd help water the tomatoes. Harlan grunted but didn't object. It was more than anyone had offered in years. Pump's stiff, he said. You'll have to prime it. Rowan nodded, already moving. The girls followed her, silent and alert like deer in tall grass. For the next hour they worked without conversation. The girls carried water back and forth in rhythm, splashing more than they poured, giggling quietly when they thought no one was watching. Harlan watched from the shade, arms crossed. She yours? He asked at one point, nodding toward Junie. All 3, Rowan said simply, not breaking her rhythm. Junie, Maple, and Wren lost their dad in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Harlan didn't ask anything more. He just tipped his hat slightly and walked back toward the barn. Inside the barn, the air was thick and stale. Harlan moved to the back wall where the old forge stood covered with a tarp. The anvil was still there, rusted at the edges, as solid as the day it was installed. He hadn't touched it since the funeral. He ran his hand across the edge of the anvil. A memory surfaced a Sunday afternoon, the clang of metal, Clara humming from the kitchen, little Emily tapping her feet to some song on the radio. Then he heard it. Laughter. Not just a giggle or a chuckle, but a full-bellied laugh. Junie. He turned toward the window. Outside, Maple had accidentally splashed Rowan with a bucket of water. Instead of scolding her, Rowan had leaned over and soaked Junie right back. The girls squealed and ran. Rowan chased them in a slow, playful jog, the kind that said she hadn't had a moment like this in far too long. Harlan watched them for longer than he meant to. Then, shaking his head, he reached for a coil of rope and busied himself with repairs that didn't need doing. Later that afternoon, Wren finally stirred. Her fever had broken in the night, but she was still weak and sluggish. Rowan sat beside her with a damp cloth brushing back her curls. Harlan knocked on the shed's frame and stepped inside without waiting. "I've got an extra fan in the house," he said. "Window unit. You can move her inside till she gets her legs back." Rowan blinked. "You sure I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." They carried Wren together, Rowan holding her gently against her chest, Harlan moving ahead to clear the way. The house hadn't changed much in 10 years. The living room was neat but sparse, a few framed photos gathering dust on a shelf, Clara and Emily smiling under a cottonwood tree. Rowan paused as she passed them, but said nothing. They set Wren down on the couch, propped her with a pillow, and turned the fan on low. The cool air hit her cheeks, and she sighed in relief. "I'll make her some rice," Rowan offered. Harlan opened a cabinet, pulled out an old saucepan, and handed it over. "Stove's finicky," he warned. "Needs a little patience." "I've got plenty of that," Rowan replied. He looked at her, then not just looked, but really saw her. There was a strength in her he recognized. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She reminded him of forged steel, bent, beaten, but never broken. As the rice simmered, Maple climbed onto the couch next to Wren and tucked herself in close. Junie wandered into the room, eyes wide at the sight of the old upright piano in the corner. "Can I?" she asked. Harlan raised a brow. "It's missing 3 keys. I'll work around it." She sat down and pressed her fingers to the yellowing keys. A simple melody rang out, halting imperfect, but warm. Something between a lullaby and a memory. Harlan leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You play?" he asked Rowan quietly. "Used to," she whispered back, before life got loud. They stood in the soft light, the smell of rice and dust in the air, as the broken piano played on. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Rowan stepped onto the porch. Harlan was already there, sitting in his usual spot, sipping something from a chipped mug. "Tea," she guessed. "Coffee." "Decaf," he muttered. Old habits. She sat beside him, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Thanks for letting us stay," she said after a long pause. "I know we're not easy." "You're not the ones who've been difficult," he replied. She looked at him, head tilted. "I mean me," he clarified, voice softer than usual. Rowan smiled faintly. "You've been alone a long time." He didn't deny it. Then she added, "Sometimes being alone becomes a habit so deep we forget how to break it." Harlan turned his eyes to the moon, then back to her. "Maybe it's time I tried." They didn't say anything else that night, but the distance between them, it was shorter than before. The morning came hotter than the day before, as if the sun had grown impatient and risen with a vengeance. The wind had died completely. The air was so still that even the flies seemed sluggish, circling lazily over the compost heap near the barn. Harlan stood shirtless at the pump well, his shoulders browned and broad beneath years of labor. He filled a rusted bucket with water sweat rolling down his spine. Across the yard, Rowan hung damp sheets on a makeshift line stretched between 2 fence posts. Her movements were slow but deliberate, as if every cloth pinned was an offering to the wind that refused to come. Inside the house, Wren stirred. She hadn't eaten much the day before, and her energy remained low. Her skin was less flushed now, but her small frame trembled when Rowan helped her sit up. "You okay, baby?" Rowan whispered, brushing Wren's hair from her forehead. Wren nodded sleepily, then murmured, "My tummy feels like feathers." Rowan smiled, masking her worry. "That means it's time for breakfast." She turned toward the stove, where a small pot of grits simmered on low. The old window unit hummed in the corner, doing its best to push stale air into movement. Behind her, Junie and Maple worked on a drawing hunched over a yellow notepad, pencils worn to the nub. A knock came at the door. Rowan opened it to find Harlan holding the bucket of water. It wasn't cold, but he'd dropped a handful of ice cubes into it from his precious stash in the root cellar. "You'll want this for her," he said, nodding toward Wren. Rowan's lips parted in surprise. "That's your last ice," he shrugged. "Ain't like I need it." She took it with both hands, the metal cool against her skin. "Thank you, Harlan." He turned, ready to go, then stopped. "I saw Maple out back earlier. She was poking near the forge." Rowan tensed. She didn't touch anything, did she? He shook his head. Just looking. But tell her not to mess with it. That place has memories. Rowan nodded slowly. Understood. Later that day, while the girls napped, Rowan stepped into the barn. It was darker than she expected, the thick air saturated with the scent of old iron and engine grease. Dust motes swirled in shafts of golden light, filtering through the roof's broken slats. She approached the forge slowly. Covered by an old canvas tarp, the anvil still stood like an altar to something half forgotten. She brushed the tarp aside. Her hand settled on its edge. Cool. Heavy. Solid. There was a presence here, something not exactly sad, but certainly not peaceful. Then she noticed something strange. A thin plank beneath the workbench was slightly askew. Curious, she crouched down and tugged at it. It came free with a pop. Behind it sat a small wooden box covered in soot and bound with a cracked leather strap. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were a few keepsakes, a pressed flower, a child's wooden block with the letter E carved into it, and a folded envelope yellowed with time. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. On the front, in neat, cursive handwriting, "To Harlan, for when you're ready." She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she returned the items, gently replaced the plank, and stepped out of the barn, heart racing with the weight of something not yet spoken. That evening she found Harlan on the porch, sharpening his pocket knife, the light of the sunset casting deep lines across his face. "I found something," she said softly. He didn't look up. In the barn, she sat beside him. Under the bench, a box. I didn't read the letter. His hand paused. Slowly, he set the knife aside. "That box belonged to Clara," he said after a long silence. "My wife." Rowan waited. She put it there before the flood. Said she'd leave me something just in case of what. He gave a hollow chuckle. "In case I never forgave myself." Rowan's eyes softened. "I still haven't opened it," he admitted. "Can't bring myself to. Every time I get close, I remember that last morning. She made peach preserves. Said she'd teach Emily how to can them later that week." He looked down at his hands, rough and weathered. They never got the chance. Rowan didn't try to fill the silence. She let it breathe, let it wrap around them like the warm air of evening. After a moment, she asked, "Do you want me to keep it for you?" He considered that. Then he shook his head. "No. If I'm going to open it, I need to be the one to do it." She nodded. "I just thought, if someone left me a letter like that, I'd want to know when I was ready too." He looked at her. Really looked. "You're not just passing through, are you?" Rowan met his gaze. "Not if you don't want me to." Another long pause, but this one felt different, not heavy, hopeful. "You still want to help fix things?" he asked. She smiled. "I told you I can fix fences." He chuckled, the sound rusty but genuine. "Then let's start with the gate." That night, after the girls had fallen asleep again, Harlan sat alone in the barn. The wooden box rested on the anvil. His hands hovered over it. He didn't open it. But he didn't put it back either. He left it there in plain view like a promise he wasn't ready to break. Not yet. But soon. The morning began with the smell of coffee and rain that never came. Rowan stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded across her chest, watching low clouds gather over the western ridge. The ground beneath her boots was cracked, thirsty. But the sky only teased heavy with promise, silent in delivery. Inside, the girls were gathered around the kitchen table. It was an old pine slab, slightly uneven, one leg reinforced with a stack of coasters and a folded dish towel. Junie was reading aloud from a second-hand children's book, while Maple traced shapes and spilled cereal. Wren sat in Rowan's lap, still a little pale, but laughing again. The wheezing had stopped. Harlan moved past them quietly, coffee in one hand, a small tin of nails in the other. "Gonna patch the coop," he said, nodding toward the backyard. Rowan rose, brushing Wren's hair gently behind her ear. "I'll join you in a minute," she said. "The girls will be fine for a while." The chicken coop sat half-collapsed near the edge of the property line. Time and weather had worn it down, but it still stood like a stubborn relic of a life half-lived. Harlan pulled his gloves on and began to hammer loose boards back into place. Rowan knelt beside him, holding nails between her fingers like a surgeon's assistant. "You always build things alone?" she asked. "I used to build with my wife," he replied without looking up. "Then with my daughter. After the accident, well, it got quieter." Rowan nodded, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I know that kind of quiet. It doesn't echo, it just settles." He looked at her, then really looked, and said nothing. But it was enough. They worked side by side for over an hour, their hands steady, their rhythm natural. When the last board was in place, Harlan leaned back, stretching his spine. "You ever think about staying?" he asked, eyes still on the coop. Rowan's voice was soft. "Every day. I just never thought someone would ask." Back at the house, Maple had wandered into the barn. She wasn't supposed to, but curiosity had its own compass. She traced the outline of the anvil with her fingertips. It was like a sleeping beast, powerful patient. Near the edge of the workbench, a small, curved metal object glinted. She picked it up. It looked like part of a horseshoe smoothed down by time. Intrigued, she carried it toward the open barn door. But her foot caught the leg of an old stool, and she stumbled forward. The curved metal slipped from her hands. It hit the edge of the pine kitchen table with a sharp crack. A splinter shot down one leg, then the table groaned, shifted, and one side dropped, snapping the weakened leg clean off. Dishes scattered, milk spilled. Junie screamed as the table crashed sideways with a thunderous clatter. The barn door swung open at the same moment Rowan and Harlan came running from the coop. "What happened?" Rowan gasped. Maple was frozen in place, eyes wide with horror. I didn't mean Rowan rushed to her daughter kneeling beside her. "It was an accident," she said, but her voice shook. Junie began to cry, holding her skinned elbow. Wren clutched the edge of the couch, startled. Harlan stepped forward, surveying the damage, the shattered leg, the broken corner. "That table," he said. His voice tightening was Clara's. Rowan looked up. "She bought it the year Emily was born," he continued. "That's where we had every meal, every birthday." "I'm sorry," Rowan whispered. "We didn't mean I said no one was to touch the forge." He barked louder now, not at Maple, but at the weight of it all. The girls huddled behind their mother, silent. Rowan stood slowly, something rising in her voice. She wasn't in the forge. She found something near the door. It was an accident. "She's 6. Harlan opened his mouth, but the words caught. "You think you're the only one who's lost something?" Rowan continued, steady but trembling. "We live in borrowed clothes. I sleep next to my youngest every night, hoping I won't hear her cough again. And all she did was pick up a piece of iron." He stared at her, breathing heavy. "I thought you said we could stay," she added. "But if we've worn out your kindness, we'll leave." By morning, she turned and walked back inside. The screen door slammed behind her like a full stop at the end of a sentence. That evening the yard was quiet. No laughter, no hammering, just cicadas and the long breath of wind slipping through the open fields. Harlan stood alone in the barn. The box was still there on the anvil. This time he didn't hesitate. His hands shook as he opened the lid. Inside the pressed flower, the wooden E-block, and the envelope, he unfolded the letter slowly. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Or maybe you're finally ready to feel again. I know how much you blame yourself, for the river, for not holding Emily tighter. But Harlan love was never about control. It was about being willing to lose. If someone comes along, someone who stirs the forge again, who brings life back to the porch and dirt to the floor and laughter into the kitchen, let them. You're not betraying us. You're becoming whole. Love again. It's okay. Clara. Harlan folded the letter with trembling fingers and held it against his chest. The sun was sinking low, painting the barn in hues of gold and rust. He didn't move for a long while. But when he did, he walked back to the house quiet and sure. He didn't knock. He opened the screen door gently and stepped inside. Rowan sat on the couch, the girls around her. She looked up. Harlan placed the letter on the table, what was left of it, and said softly, "I'd like to fix the table. If you'll let me." Rowan stared at him. Then she nodded and whispered, "Only if we help." The following morning brought with it a kind of quiet that was different from the silence of pain. It was the hush that comes before healing, the kind of stillness that lets wounds breathe. Rowan stood on the porch with a mug of tea in her hands. The girls were still inside, helping Junie write out a pretend menu for their imaginary cafe, where everything cost one smile or a story. Rowan watched the field stretch out under the soft dawn light, golden and undisturbed. The screen door creaked open. Harlan stepped out carrying 2 boards of sanded pine under one arm and a satchel of tools slung over his shoulder. "I thought we could start on the table," he said, his voice rough from sleep, or maybe from the weight of the day before. Rowan nodded. "Girls will want to help," I figured. They walked side by side to the barn, where the air was already warming, but still held a faint coolness, like the tail end of a forgotten breeze. The old table sat inside. One leg snapped clean off, one corner splintered. Harlan knelt beside it and ran his hand along the edge. Clara hated this wobble. Said it gave the plates character. Rowan smiled. "I like the sound of her." "She would have liked you," he said softly. "She liked people who told the truth." Rowan took a slow breath. Did she write more? He glanced toward the shelf where Clara's letter now sat in a glass jar, sealed like something sacred. One letter. But it said everything. The girls arrived a little later, barefoot and curious. Junie had braided Maple's hair. Wren was carrying a small basket of wildflowers she insisted would make the wood happier. They all helped in their own way. Junie held the new leg steady while Harlan screwed it in place. Maple sanded down the splintered edges under Rowan's watchful eye. Wren kept humming softly, placing a daisy into a small crack near the table's edge, as if mending it with color. "What's this one called again?" Maple asked, holding up a coarse grain of sandpaper. 80 grit, Harlan replied. "Coarse but kind. Good for starting over." Rowan glanced at him, smiling. Like some people I know. He rolled his eyes, but a smirk tugged at his lips. The work was slow and deliberate. Not rushed, not mechanical. Every board placed back into position felt like something more than wood. It felt like intention. Like memory made whole again. As midday approached, the heat crept in like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. Sweat beaded down everyone's temples, sticking clothes to skin. But no one complained. "Break time," Rowan called, handing out lemonade in mismatched mugs. They sat in the shade of the barn, lined up like an odd little family. A gruff widower, a war-tired mother, and 3 girls who somehow made everything feel lighter. Junie leaned her head against Harlan's shoulder. It surprised them both. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He let her stay there. "Did you ever build anything big?" she asked him. "I once made a wrought iron gate for a church in Laramie," he replied. "Took 6 weeks. Had angels on both sides. Real ornate. Can you teach me how to make an angel?" He blinked, then looked at Rowan. "She's not afraid to ask." Rowan said, sipping her drink. "No," Harlan said quietly. "She's not." He ruffled Junie's hair and said, "I'll see what I can do." That evening, they sat around the newly restored table now sanded smooth and steady. The girls had prepared peanut butter sandwiches and sliced apples with a side of overboiled pasta Junie insisted was fancy enough. A small candle flickered in the center. Wren's idea. Harlan poured sweet tea into jam jars. Rowan set mismatched plates in front of each chair. The conversation flowed like water down a steady stream, soft, wandering, filled with laughter and small stories. No one said it aloud, but they all knew this was the first real dinner the table had seen in a long, long time. Afterward, Rowan and Harlan stood in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand. The girls were on the porch, drawing with sidewalk chalk, Wren naming each flower she'd drawn as if bestowing blessings. "You did something brave," Rowan said, passing him a rinsed plate. "I didn't do anything special. You opened the letter. You fixed the table. You let us in." Harlan paused, then nodded. "It's not easy, carrying ghosts." Rowan leaned against the sink. "No, but letting someone walk beside you while you carry them, that makes it lighter." He looked at her eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Rowan," he began, but the words didn't come easily. She didn't push. Instead, she dried her hands and walked to the porch, calling the girls in for bedtime. But she left the door open behind her, just in case he was ready to follow. That night, Harlan stepped into the forge for the first time in nearly a decade. He lit the coal slowly, watching the embers catch the flames rise. He didn't wear gloves. He didn't need to. He placed a piece of cold iron onto the anvil, raised the hammer, and struck. The sound rang out across the night like a bell calling the lost home. The morning after the forge roared back to life, the entire house smelled faintly of coal and iron, a scent both ancient and alive. Junie noticed it first, pausing at the porch steps as the others filtered out for breakfast. "Harlan made something last night," she whispered to Maple, wide-eyed. I could hear it, like thunder. Inside the barn, the forge had gone cold again, but the presence of fire still lingered. On the work table sat a roughly shaped angel wing, not polished or painted, but solid, forged from the same steel that had once framed a church gate in Laramie. It gleamed faintly in the morning light, unfinished, but beautiful in its imperfections. Rowan stood at the threshold, her hand resting on the doorframe. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Harlan glanced at her, then nodded once. By late afternoon, the heat had returned with a vengeance. The air felt thick and unyielding. Rowan suggested they keep the girls inside, where the shade and box fans at least made breathing possible. Harlan returned to the barn, working slowly, methodically hammering out details on the second wing. The rhythmic clang echoed across the land like a hymn. Junie sat near the door, sketching ideas for the finished sculpture, while Maple sorted through bolts and washers like a miniature apprentice. Wren stayed close to Rowan, clutching her favorite rag doll, a threadbare thing they'd named Daisy Blue, and asking for more stories about her father. "Was he brave like Harlan?" she asked. Rowan hesitated. He was brave in a different way. He didn't carry hammers, but he carried heavy things too. Wren seemed satisfied with that answer. It was just past sunset when the accident happened. Maple had grown tired of bolts and wandered to the far end of the barn near the stacked lumber. Curious fingers tugged at a rope she thought was loose, not realizing it was the tension line stabilizing one of the old ceiling beams. The snap was sudden, a sharp crack of dry wood followed by a groaning creak overhead. Harlan turned instantly. "Maple, move." He lunged as the beam buckled. Rowan, just steps away from the barn, heard the thunderous crash and sprinted inside. Dust billowed like smoke. For a long moment, no one breathed, then a small cough. Maple sat curled under the workbench, dusty and pale, but unharmed. Harlan, however, was pinned beneath the edge of the collapsed rafter, his shoulder caught under a thick knot of timber. Rowan reached him first. "Harlan." His teeth were gritted, face ashen. "Get Maple out!" he rasped. "Now." Rowan nodded. Junie scrambled in and pulled her sister out by the arm, both girls sobbing. "Harlan, stay with me," Rowan said firmly, hands feeling for leverage. "I'm not going anywhere," he muttered, then hissed as pain surged through his arm. "But I think my shoulder's done pretending it's young." She scanned the beam. It was heavy but not unmovable. She needed a fulcrum. "Junie," she shouted. "Bring the jack from the shed, the one we used to prop the coop." The girl nodded and ran like her feet were on fire. Rowan stayed with Harlan, pressing her hands to his chest, his arm. "You still with me?" "I've had worse," he lied. She looked down at him, eyes sharp. "Don't you dare try to be noble." He actually managed a half laugh. Old habits. The jack arrived clunky and rusted, but still serviceable. With Junie and Maple watching from a distance, Rowan propped it under the beam and began to crank. Inch by inch, the wood lifted. "Ready?" she asked. Harlan nodded. On 3, she pulled him free. He gasped as the pressure released, clutching his shoulder, but he didn't fall. Instead, he leaned against the bench, panting. Dislocated, he grunted. "Maybe worse. I can wrap it. Maybe help you rest it." "No," he interrupted. "Set it." Rowan blinked. "Harlan, I'm not a medic anymore. Still better than the ER 30 miles away." She bit her lip, searching his face. "You trust me?" He didn't even hesitate. "With my life." It wasn't pretty, but it worked. With a towel between his teeth and one short scream that shook the windows, Rowan popped the joint back into place. Harlan sat against the barn wall afterward, pale and drenched in sweat, but grinning like a fool. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Rowan sat beside him, breathing hard. "You're luckier than you think." They stayed there for a long while. The girls brought water, then retreated, sensing that something delicate was forming in that silence. Finally, Rowan spoke. "You could have been killed." He nodded. "You didn't even think, you just ran for her." "She was near the forge," he said softly. "And she matters now." Rowan looked at him. "So do you." He turned to her eyes, searching hers, and for a moment everything stilled. That night, the girls fell asleep close together, curled up like wildflowers in the same bed. The house was dark, except for a small lamp on the porch, and the wind had finally begun to stir, brushing gently through the open windows. Harlan sat at the kitchen table, his arm in a sling, the angel wing resting in the center. Rowan placed a glass of cold water beside him and sat down. He tapped the metal gently with one finger. It cracked when the beam hit. "Can you fix it?" He looked up. "Yeah, but it'll never be the same. There'll be a scar." Rowan smiled gently. "That's how you know it survived." He studied her for a long moment. "I never thought I'd be part of something again." "You're not part of something," she said. "You're part of us." And for the first time in 10 years, Harlan didn't feel like a man rebuilding his life from ruins. He felt like someone being welcomed home. A few days passed, and with them came a new rhythm, one not built on survival, but on something softer. Something that almost felt like peace. Harlan's arm remained in a sling, which meant he couldn't do much forging, but that didn't stop him from supervising. He'd sit just outside the barn, a wide-brimmed hat shielding his eyes, barking instructions, as Rowan and the girls tried their hands at simple tasks. Junie, ever the eager apprentice, took to shaping cold metal with a file. Maple sorted nails by size with impressive focus. And Wren, too young to handle tools, became self-appointed project manager, giving out imaginary awards to anyone who worked really, really hard. Harlan had started calling them the Hale Crew. The name stuck. One morning, Rowan found Harlan sitting alone on the back porch, the sling off his injured arm resting gently on his lap. "You pushing too hard again?" she asked, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee. He took the offered cup with a grateful nod. "I'm just resting it." No heroics. She sat beside him, and for a long while they just drank in silence, watching the wind move over the dry grass. Then softly, Harlan said, "There's something I've been putting off." Rowan looked over at him. "I've got a place I visit," he continued. "It's time I went back. I'd like you to come with me." She didn't ask where. She only nodded. Of course, they left after breakfast, the girls staying behind, under Junie's careful watch and strict instructions. No running with tools, no climbing fences, no marshmallow fights without supervision. Harlan drove his old pickup down a winding country road, lined with golden grass and broken fences. They didn't speak much on the drive. The kind of silence they shared now was full, not empty, the comfortable kind, that didn't need to fill space to feel meaningful. Eventually, the road narrowed into gravel, then dirt, until they pulled up beside a small wooden gate. No sign. No name. Just a path through tall weeds and weather-worn stones. Rowan followed him up the hill. At the crest, 2 headstones stood beneath the shade of a crooked oak tree. One read, "Clara Rhodes, beloved wife." The other, "Emily Rhodes, forever our sunshine." Harlan took off his hat. Rowan remained a few steps behind, letting him have the space. He crouched down, ran a calloused hand across the names. "Been over a year since I came," he said, quietly. Couldn't do it anymore. Felt like I was talking to the wind. Rowan walked closer, still silent. "But something's changed," he added. "Maybe I changed." He stood and looked at Rowan. "I didn't want to bring you here just to mourn," he said. "I wanted you to know that they're part of this story, too." Rowan swallowed. Her voice was low, careful. "Do you believe they'd approve?" Harlan glanced back at the stones. "I think. Clara always knew I'd be too stubborn to heal on my own. That letter she left, it wasn't just for comfort. It was permission." He turned to Rowan fully. "And Emily. She would have loved Wren. They'd have driven us crazy." Rowan smiled through a mist of tears. They stood there beneath that crooked oak, not saying anything more, just letting the breeze wrap around them like a silent prayer. When they returned to the ranch that evening, the smell of burnt sugar filled the house. Maple had tried to make cookies. "Don't panic," Junie said as they entered. "We saved one tray." Wren emerged from the kitchen with flour on her nose, proudly holding up a lopsided cookie. "I made this one for you, Mr. Harlan. It's shaped like a dog, but it might be a horse." He took it with a grin. "It's perfect. I'll treasure it forever." Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Harlan and Rowan sat on the porch once again. This time, their hands found each other naturally, without question. Rowan looked at him and said, "I know what it cost you to take me there today." "It didn't cost," he replied. "It gave." A pause. "You know I used to think forgiveness was a gift you gave someone else," he said. "But maybe it's what you give yourself, once you're brave enough to remember." Rowan leaned her head on his good shoulder. "I think we're remembering the right things now." The porch light flickered gently above them, moths dancing in its warm glow. And somewhere inside the house, the angel wing they'd been working on caught the moonlight and shined, cracked, imperfect but whole again. Autumn began to tease the edge of the fields. Though the days were still warm, there was a shift in the mornings, a hush, a bite in the breeze, and the faint scent of brittle leaves drifting in from the north. The land knew before the calendar did. Something was changing. Harlan sat at the edge of the barn with his sling finally gone, and his tools returned to their rightful place in his hands. The angel sculpture stood nearly complete, now 2 steel wings, not identical, but balanced. They gleamed in the late light like something born from memory and fire. Wren wandered in barefoot, holding a ragged shoelace in one hand, and something small in the other. "I found a treasure," she announced. Harlan set his tongs aside. "Let's see it, boss." She opened her palm. Nestled in the dirt of her fingers was an old brass ring, simple, dull, and bent at one edge. "It was in the garden," she explained, "near the spot where Mommy says the soil's softest." He took the ring, gently turning it over. This was part of a harness, from the old workhorse we had back when Emily was a baby. Wren's eyes widened. "Is it magic?" He smiled. "It might be." She tied the shoelace around it like a necklace. "I'll wear it then, just in case." And before he could answer, she reached up and looped it around his neck instead. "Actually," she declared, "you need magic more." Harlan blinked, touched the ring, then looked at her, not as a child, but as something sacred, like grace in the form of sticky fingers and wide eyes. "Thank you, Ren." She smiled. "Now you're protected." That evening, Rowan prepared dinner, while the girls played outside with chalk and fallen leaves. Harlan came in quietly, set the brass ring on the kitchen counter, and washed his hands at the deep sink. "Something smells good," he said. "Pasta," Rowan replied. "I only slightly overcooked it this time." "Progress," he said, grinning. She elbowed him gently. They moved around each other with practiced ease. Now, not like strangers, or even guests, but like two people who knew how to share a small space without needing to say much. As the water boiled and the sauce thickened, Rowan looked up and asked, "Did you ever think your life would look like this?" Harlan leaned against the counter. "Not even once." She smiled, then added, "And now?" He shrugged, glancing toward the window where the girls were chasing each other with handfuls of red leaves. "Now I can't imagine anything else." After dinner, Junie asked if they could have a story by the fire pit. Harlan nodded, and soon they were outside, bundled in light jackets, a modest fire crackling in the barrel ringed by smooth stones. Maple leaned against, Rowan Wren sat on Harlan's lap, and Junie took charge with a flashlight under her chin. "This is the story," she declared, "of the blacksmith and the brave lady." Rowan raised an eyebrow. Junie continued. "Once upon a time, there was a blacksmith who lived all alone because his heart was made of iron. But then one day, a lady showed up with 3 wild daughters and asked to stay for just one day." Wren gasped, like it was the first time she'd heard it. The blacksmith said no at first, because his heart didn't know how to feel anymore. But the lady was strong and kind, and she cooked weird pasta, and her daughters made the house loud and alive. Maple giggled. So little by little, the blacksmith's iron heart started to melt, and one day he looked around and realized it wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home. Junie paused, then looked at Harlan. The end. There was a long silence. Then Harlan said, voice steady but rough, "Best story I've heard in years." After the girls went to bed, Rowan lingered at the porch railing, watching the stars settle overhead like spilled sugar. Harlan came out carrying something wrapped in an old handkerchief. "I wanted to show you something," he said. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a ring hand-forged from steel, smooth, simple, and without ornament. It was shaped perfectly without flaw, but it wasn't flashy. It was strong. Rowan blinked. "Is that?" "I made it last night," he said, eyes not leaving hers. "No pressure, no speeches. But I'm not much of a man for waiting around anymore." She stared at the ring breath caught somewhere between memory and possibility. "You're serious, I've never been more." Rowan reached out, touched the cool metal. "You made this, I made it for you. But also for me. Because I finally want something that lasts." She looked at him, her voice low. "Do the girls know?" He smiled. "I think Junie wrote the ceremony already." Rowan laughed, tears shining in her eyes. "Of course she did." Harlan took her hand, didn't press the ring into her fingers, just held it between them. "We don't need to call it anything yet," he said. "Not until you're ready. I just wanted you to know." "I am." Rowan closed her hand around the ring. "I am too." And they stood there in the quiet, not needing vows or flowers or witnesses, only each other, and the sound of wind rustling through the tall grass like applause from the land itself. The storm came without warning. 1 minute the sky was a gentle shade of gold, and the next it turned a bruised gray, the kind that meant trouble, the kind that made animals quiet and wind stand still before it hit. Junie was the first to notice. "Mom," she called from the porch. "The clouds are moving too fast." Rowan stepped outside, squinting up at the sky. The hair on her arms rose. Inside. Now. She didn't have to tell them twice. The girls darted in. Rowan followed, bolting the front and back doors. Harlan was already in the barn, securing loose tools, when the first wind slammed against the roof like a giant's breath. The rain followed, not in drops, but sheets. It fell sideways, as if hurled by fists. Thunder rolled overhead like a freight train, close and mean. Harlan returned, soaked to the bone. "It's bad," he said. "Real bad. I haven't seen one like this in years." The power flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the kitchen in a sudden gulp. Wren whimpered. Rowan lit a candle and pulled the girls close. Harlan found the old oil lamp under the sink, lit it with practiced ease, and set it on the table between them. They sat there for nearly an hour, listening to the storm rage outside. Junie tried to act brave, reading from her storybook with a flashlight, but her voice trembled. Maple clung to Daisy Blue, and Wren pressed herself against Harlan's side like he was the only stable thing in the world. "Will the roof fly off?" Wren asked, eyes wide. "Not tonight," Harlan said, rubbing her back. "This house has held together through worse." "You sure?" she whispered. He nodded. "Because it's got all of us in it now. That makes it stronger." When the rain finally slowed, Rowan stepped onto the porch. The ground had become a lake of mud. One of the apple trees was down, and the old chicken coop had taken a hit, the roof half caved and the fence ripped away like paper. "We'll fix it," Harlan said, stepping beside her. She nodded. "We always do." But her voice was tight, distracted. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "There was a letter. From the county. A week ago." He raised an eyebrow. "They're reviewing old titles, inherited land parcels left unclaimed. There's talk about zoning. Taxes. I thought it was routine, but after this storm, if they send someone out and the damage is too extensive, they might seize the land Harlan finished for her." She nodded. "I didn't want to worry you." He exhaled slowly. "No use worrying about something we haven't seen yet. We fix what we can. We make our case when it's time." Rowan turned to him. "It's not just about land anymore." "I know," he said. "It's home." The next morning brought silence again, the kind that only follows a storm. The sky was wiped clean pale and blue. Birds returned, hesitantly pecking at puddles. The damage wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was enough. The porch roof sagged. One of the side fences had come loose. A window in the girls' room had cracked. Harlan didn't wait. He pulled on his boots and started repairs before the dew had dried. Rowan worked beside him, patching holes with whatever they had on hand. The girls gathered loose nails, repotted fallen plants, and even turned the broken apple tree into a makeshift fort, with a blanket thrown over its branches. By noon, sweat streaked their faces, and shirts clung to their backs. But they didn't stop. Not until Harlan called out, "All right, break time." They all collapsed in the shade. Rowan poured lemonade into mismatched glasses, ice clinking like tiny bells. Junie passed around slices of watermelon. Wren sat cross-legged next to Harlan, chewing thoughtfully. You think storms get angry sometimes? She asked. Harlan leaned back on his elbows. Maybe. What do we do when they get angry again? He looked at her, then at all of them. We hold on to each other tighter. Rowan smiled and clinked her glass lightly against his. To tighter. The girls followed suit, giggling. To tighter. It was a small moment, but it carried the weight of permanence, a quiet vow. That evening, Rowan stepped into the barn and found Harlan sanding something on the bench. The angel sculpture now had a stand, welded from horseshoes and old plow parts. It didn't look like anything from a museum, but it stood proud, sturdy, weathered, like them. What's it for? She asked. He looked up. The girl's garden. Thought it needed something to remind them. They're always protected. Rowan touched the wing gently. Then she pulled something from her pocket, the steel ring he'd made her. She held it out, eyes glistening. Let's not wait. He stared at her. Are you sure? Rowan smiled. I'm not sure about much in this world, but I'm sure about this. He stepped forward, took the ring, and slid it onto her finger. There were no vows, no audience, just two hands scarred and steady finding each other in the half-light. Outside, the wind moved softly through the grass. No storm this time. Only peace. The morning of the wedding arrived like any other. No fanfare, no ribbons, no formal invitations. Just sunlight filtering through gingham curtains, the smell of cinnamon bread rising from the oven, and three girls whispering far too loudly in the living room. Rowan opened her eyes to find Wren standing beside the bed, holding up a white sundress with wrinkled lace at the hem. Junie says, "You have to wear this," Wren whispered. Rowan sat up, blinking. I thought we agreed this wasn't going to be a real wedding. She said it still counts, Wren replied seriously, even if it's pretend. Rowan chuckled and took the dress. Well then, I suppose we better not be late. Out in the yard, Maple was hanging wild flowers along the fence, with clothespins humming under her breath. Junie had set up an altar, a table made of crates stacked beside the old forge, now decorated with candles, worn books, and one very determined-looking paper angel sculpture taped to the side. The sculpture Harlan had finished the night before, twin steel wings spread wide standing in the girls' garden, its base half buried in warm dirt. He'd added an inscription beneath it in small letters, for those who stayed. He was waiting by the forge, wearing a pressed denim shirt, and the boots he usually reserved for Sunday mornings, and hard truths. When Rowan walked out onto the porch, the entire yard seemed to hush. She wore the sundress, no veil, no bouquet, just a smile soft enough to still a storm. "Ready?" she asked. He took her hand. Always. They stood under the cottonwood tree, their audience, three girls, a pair of curious chickens, and a wind chime that occasionally offered its opinion. Junie, holding a note card and trying to sound serious, cleared her throat. "We are gathered here today," she began, not because of fancy rings or chocolate fountains, or she looked down, frowned, or whatever else weddings usually have. Rowan stifled a laugh. But because Harlan and Rowan love each other, and because we love them, and because we all survived a big storm together, and that means something. Maple raised her hand. She means both kinds of storm. Junie nodded. Yes, both kinds. She turned back to the couple. Do you promise to keep fixing things even when they break again? I do, Harlan said without hesitation. Rowan squeezed his hand. I do too. Do you promise to let people in even when it's scary? I do. I do. Junie smiled. Then you're married? Probably. Everyone laughed. Maple threw flower petals made from torn-up newspapers. Wren blew bubbles instead of ringing a bell. And there, under a cottonwood tree with no music, no pastor, No cake, a family was made. Later, they celebrated with lemonade and sandwiches seated on blankets under the sun. Rowan danced with the girls in her bare feet, while Harlan watched from his rocking chair with a grin so wide it seemed to peel away 10 years of loneliness. "You look different," Junie told him, handing him a slice of strawberry pie. "Good different, like someone who has room in his heart again." He nodded. "I do." That evening, when the girls had gone to bed, exhausted from dancing and storytelling and inventing new surnames for their blended family, Rowan found Harlan out by the forge. He was leaning against the doorframe, looking at the stars. She walked up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "You know what I used to pray for?" she asked. He looked at her. A quiet house, a safe place, a man who wouldn't disappear. Harlan's throat tightened. "And did you get that?" She nodded, in the most unexpected, unshiny, handmade way imaginable. He smiled. "I prayed for silence for a long time. Thought it would save me." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What changed? I stopped mistaking quiet for peace. You taught me that." Inside the barn, the forge was dark now, but the angel sculpture stood outside, catching the moonlight like it was alive. Above it, fireflies blinked. And beneath the cottonwood tree, where the wind had once bent the branches in grief, there was now laughter in the soil. Not a loud kind, but a lasting kind. Spring came quietly. It didn't arrive with parades of blossoms or dramatic thaws, but with soft breezes and the slow unfurling of green along the fence posts, across the garden rows, through the cracks in the porch floorboards. Even the chickens seemed to walk with a new rhythm, as if they too had survived something worth remembering. On a late afternoon in April, Harlan sat beneath the cottonwood tree, whittling a piece of cedar into the shape of a small bird. At his feet, Wren built a kingdom out of rocks and twigs. Maple was perched on the porch steps, lost in a book. Junie helped Rowan plant tomato starts along the garden bed. The ranch buzzed with life, the kind you don't notice all at once, the kind that builds slowly, until one day you realize the silence has been replaced by laughter. Not the loud kind, but the lasting kind. After dinner, Harlan brought out a small wooden stool he had carved for Wren. Her initials were burned into the top in curly letters with tiny wings etched beneath. She gasped when she saw it. "It's for me, all yours, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "You're too big to be sitting on crates forever." She hugged his leg. "Now I can sit with you." "You've always been sitting with me," he whispered, lifting her onto the stool beside him. "You just didn't know it yet." That night, Rowan found a letter tucked beneath her pillow. It was written in Harlan's careful, slanted handwriting. No flourishes, no metaphors, just honesty. "Rowan, I used to think forgiveness was something you had to earn. You showed me it was something you could live into. This ranch wasn't home until your voice filled the porch. The forge wasn't useful until your girls tracked mud through the barn. And I wasn't whole until you gave me the chance to become someone new. I love you. And I always will. H." She sat on the edge of the bed, letter pressed to her chest, and cried. The quiet kind of tears. The grateful kind. In early May, the county assessor arrived. A young man in a collared shirt and polished boots, clipboard in hand, and a cautious smile on his face. Rowan tensed as he stepped out of the truck. Harlan greeted him calmly. "You hear about the zoning?" "Yes, sir," the man replied. "Routine check. They flagged this property because it hadn't shown recent utility usage. Until 6 months ago." "Well," Harlan said, smiling faintly, "it's been in use now." The assessor walked the property making notes. He paused when he reached the garden, then again at the forge. "This place is lived in," he said. Junie walked past carrying a chicken like it was a purse. The man chuckled. "Well," he said, flipping his clipboard shut, It seems to me this isn't just a residence anymore. It's a working homestead. Rowan stepped forward. So, he nodded. So the land's yours. You're not at risk. You're growing, producing. And he glanced at Wren drawing hearts on the porch, clearly thriving. Harlan shook his hand. Thank you. No, sir, the assessor said. Thank you. It's good to see a place come back to life. A week later, the sign went up. It was carved from a thick slab of reclaimed barn wood, mounted above the arch at the front gate. Roads and Hale forged with fire, built with love. The girls cheered. Rowan kissed Harlan's cheek. Even the wind seemed to approve. On the anniversary of Clara and Emily's passing, Harlan returned to the hill under the crooked oak. But this time, he didn't go alone. Rowan stood beside him holding his hand. The girls placed flowers on each stone, wild daisies, and lavender sprigs from the garden. Junie whispered, "Thank you," and Wren added, "We'll take care of him now." Maple said nothing. She just touched the name Emily with quiet fingers and placed one of her drawings beside it, a sketch of the angel sculpture in the garden. Later, as they descended the hill, Rowan glanced at Harlan. "You okay?" He nodded. For the first time. Yeah, that summer they built an outdoor bench beneath the cottonwood wide enough for 5. Every evening they sat there, sipping lemonade, swatting mosquitoes, listening to the cicadas sing their dusk lullabies. One night, Wren climbed up and settled in the center, arms stretched. "This is my favorite seat," she announced. "Why's that?" Harlan asked. She smiled. "Because it's where everyone touches." Rowan leaned her head against Harlan's shoulder. And in that moment, under a sky streaked with orange and gold, he realized something. He wasn't holding on to the past anymore. He was living forward. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to know where in the world our Soul Moments family is growing. So feel free to share your city or country in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share true-to-life tales of kindness, healing, and quiet hope stories that speak not just to the mind, but to the soul. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never underestimate the power of a simple act of love.